1772 to 1719. And the other person, a companion of Joseph Edison, was Steele. His full name is Richard Steele, whose dates are 1672 to 1729. So these were the minds who had that flair of writing. They were they wrote in collaboration. They wrote together. That's why their names are taken together. So their writings were full of humor, wit, style, and all that. And the first 30 years of 18th century they wrote. And I told you that they are known for writing periodicals, periodical publications, which the first periodical they produced was Spectators. Now, Spectator is a famous name. Spectator is one of the periodicals. In fact, the maiden periodical they produced or they wrote, it was about, so Spectator, one of the periodicals, in fact, one of the first periodical they produced, it was a commentary on general life. So it talked about the life in general. It talked about the manners. It talked about the customs, traditions. It talked about habits of the people. Okay, and the other periodical was titled as Guardian. Okay, shall I share my screen also? 1 second. Yes. Okay, and one of the periodicals was called as Guardian, and the other was called as Old Whig, and yet another was called as the Freeholder. See, so these were the names of different periodicals. Okay, and what was the interesting thing? Interestingly, they changed the names of periodicals, the stuff, the subject matter, the form of writing, the style, everything remained the same. But they, believed in changing the names of periodicals. Okay, in kind of to kind of create a suspense among the people, so that people thought, people thought that it would be interesting. But when it comes to subject matter and the form and style of writing, it was the same. Okay, and all these Guardian, Spectator, Old Whig, the Freeholder, and last comes is Tatler. Now, when we talk about these people called as uh, Addison and Steele, they are known for the Spectator and Tatler. Spectator was a maiden publication, the maiden periodical, and Tatler was the last. And they had their own some other names to it. They added some other names to the periodicals also. They thought that.
Sorry to interrupt you, sir. Please excuse me. Please tell me who were the two people. One was Richard
Yeah,
Steele.
one was Richard Steele. The other person was Joseph Addison.
Thank you, sir.
Addison and Steele, they are famously known as Addison and Steele, but their full names were Joseph Addison and Richard Steele. Their names are taken together because they worked in collaboration. They worked together. That's why their names are taken together, and they are known for writing periodicals. The first periodical they produced was Tatler, Spectator, and the last periodical they produced was Tatler. In between, they produced other periodicals also with other names, but the subject matter remained the same. They did not talk about any other things. Spectator, for example, I told you that it talked about the general way of life. It talked about the customs, the traditions, the habits of people. Okay, in the similar way, in the similar manner, other periodicals talked about the same thing, but they just changed the names. Okay, so that people thought that it would be a different thing, and they read it. So it kind of Spectator, when you talk about Spectator and Tatler, they kind of, we can say, gave status. They kind of gave identity to these people called Addison and Steele, these two fellow writers who were companions and friends also. So now this was the age of, when people were writing periodicals. Before that, people were, wrote dramas. They wrote, writers were interest in writing poetry. They produced poetry. But now when we come to this point of English literature, British literature, now we have in the later part of the 18th century, we can see the rise of the novel writing. Okay. So novel came up. When we talk about the novel, now I'm giving you the background of, now somebody was asking me about the page number. You can go to the block 3rd, unit 11. Okay, so we are talking about, here we're talking about background to the novel and to the romantic poetry. Now I shall briefly talk about the rise of novel. So I told you, in fact, started we have talked about, talked about it. I mean, we started talking about it in the previous class also. So it was the novel which came up in the later part of the century, and it is a novel which sustained itself, because in novel you have interesting plots, you have sustained plot, one link to another. So people found it interesting. The novel writing, people found it interesting because you have series of events taking place in a novel. It's not like a short poem or a prose. When we talk about a novel, there are a number of events taking place, and one event is always linked to another event. And when you go through a novel, when you read a novel, you can stop, you can resume it, and later on you can resume the story. That is how it is interesting. And talking about novel we can say is the baby of 18th century, because it was produced, novels started in 18th century. And the first novel was written by Richardson, the pioneers of novel, we can say the beginners of novel. The novelist was called as Richardson, who came up with his novel called Pamela. Now, Pamela is a novel which was kind of, religious in nature, a spiritual novel, when we talk about the nature of the novel. The other novelist who came up with a novel was called as Henry Fielding. Henry Fielding is the name of a novelist who came up with his novel called Shamila. Now, Shamila was actually a kind of, parody of Pamela. He wrote, he made fun of his Richardson's novel called Pamela. So Pamela and Shamila. Tom, if you talk about the novelist called Henry Fielding, he has, in your syllabus, there is a novel called Joseph Andrews, which is prescribed in your syllabus. So the other novel, for example, you have the other novel called The Pilgrim's Progress, which was once again a religious novel, a spiritual novel, we can say. It was written by John Bunyan, in the name of the novelist. So, but when we talk about the father or the founder of novel writing in English, Henry Fielding is regarded as the father or founder of English novel. Why? Because if you talk about any religious writing, there is no place, there is no scope, or there is no scope or space for humor, wit, etc. So that is why Henry Fielding, it was a kind of, when we talk about Shamila, the novel, the second novel, which was written in response to the novel called Pamela, written by Richardson. It was a response, we can say. It was a reaction to the first novel by Richardson, and he kind of made fun of it. So that is why Henry Fielding, who came up with a novel called Shamila, and this person, this writer or this novelist is regarded as the founder and father of English novel. He has some other novel to his credit also called Moll Flanders. Moll Flanders is yet another novel by Henry Fielding. Henry Fielding, who is regarded as the father and founder of English novel. Now, in this, now we are talking about late 18th century, and we have yet another kind or type of novel called Picaresque novel. Picaresque novel is a kind of novel where the protagonist or the hero or the central character or the main character is, kind of unheroic of hero, unheroic hero. Okay, so protagonist of the novel is the, we can say, the antithesis of the heroic character. So that is what Vikas novel is all about. And kind of, comical counterpart, we can say, of the novel. And yet we have another novelist in, writing in this particular age, in the later part of the 18th century, who was called as Daniel Defoe. Now, Daniel Defoe talked about, he wrote adventurous novel called Robinson Crusoe. Robinson Crusoe was a novel he produced. So the prose writing, we can say, of the 18th century is the counterpart of the satirical poetry of the 17th century. When we talk about the previous century, the neoclassical 17th century in general, somebody is asking me about the unit we are talking about. We are talking about unit 11. Please go back to your textbook. You see unit 11. Check unit 11 in your textbook. The block is block 3. We are doing unit 11. Okay. So prose writing. When we talk about the previous age, when we talk about the neoclassical 17th century age, the prose writing was satirical in nature, because they produced, epics. They produced mock epics. And the prose writing, it was satirical in nature. For example, all these people, John Dryden, Alexander Pope, they produce satirical writings. So it started actually with Dryden, as I already told you, and Dryden's one of the texts, one of the poems is, epic poems is in your syllabus, called Absalom and Achitophel, and it ended with Johnson, Dr. Johnson. And we have one more Johnson, who is known as Ben Jonson, who was a contemporary, who is also known as a neoclassical poet, who wrote that poem called On Shakespeare. So all in all, we can say that the novel came up in the later part of the century. Richardson was the first novelist who came up with a novel, and he wrote a novel called Pamela. Then Henry Fielding came, he wrote a response to this novel called Shamila, called Pamela. His novel was called Shamila. It was a response to him. And later on, his other novels are Paul Flanders. And then we have, yet other writers also who were writing in the same genre. They were Daniel Defoe, and who wrote adventurous novels. We had some other great novelists also. So, but when we talk about here comes the age called pre-romantic. We must talk about some poets in this particular age who were called as pre-romantics. Pre-romantics was, it was not like a group like Wordsworth or Coleridge, like other neoclassical poets, but they were separate. They were individuals, we can say, and they shared a similar thought, we can say. For example, we have poets called. Now I am coming to the romantic poetry, but I'm before that. There is an age called minor age called a pre-romantics period. So now pre-romantics, or all these writers who came before romantic writers. Now there was this, it was not a group there, but there were individuals like Thomas Gray, Edward Thomas, Oliver Goldsmith, William Collins, William Blake. All these individuals, largely not a group, I told you already, they are known as pre-romantic poets because they came before romantic poets like Shelley, Byron, Keats, Wordsworth, Coleridge, etc. So these people were called as pre-romantics. Pre-romantics means they came before the romantic period. So who were the people? Thomas Gray, Gray is the spelling. Okay, Edward Thomas is another poet. Oliver Goldsmith, you might have heard the name. William Collins, William Collins is yet another pre-romantic poet. William Cooper, Cowper. William Cooper is yet another pre-romantic poet. William Blake, in fact, who is the famous of all, so for this, these people are concerned. William Blake, we will talk about him. And they were the individuals. They were not a group, and they kind of, shared a similar thought or ideology, we can say. And when we talk about this age, when these people were writing, some important events, took place. Because I always tell you that when we talk about when writers are writing, when these different events take place, so they directly influence common man, and they influence writers also, and therefore they influence writings, literature. Okay, so there is always kind of in every age. That's why we have different literature. For example, if you talk about neoclassical literature, we had literature which is completely different from romantic. In romantic literature, you will find altogether a different kinds of writings being produced. Okay, so neoclassical literature or 17th century literature, it was a satire, or it was mock epics or mock heroic poems were produced, or poetry was written. It was all about satire. It was it talked about the limitations of man. It talked about the relationship between man and society. So it talked about man and society in general, the relationship they share between them. Okay, so one age is the following age. The next age is always a reaction to the preceding age, to the previous age. As for example, romantic age, we can say it is a reaction to the neoclassical age. Neoclassical age was a reaction to Elizabethan age or 16th century age, and Elizabethan age is a reaction to we can say to the to age of Chaucer, etc. Okay, so now we must talk about the important event which took place was American War of Independence. It happened in American War of Independence. When we talk about American War of Independence, it happened between 1973 to 1976, and in 1976 it became USA. Okay, so at the same time, some other event took place which is known as French Revolution. So French Revolution happened in 1789. So these two events had changed the outlook. We can say that they had these French Revolution and American War of Independence. They had changed the outlook of the age, outlook, the tone, the tenor, the mood, the temperament. We can say the temper of the age, and it had an impact on its writers. Obviously, as I have been talking about it, when some event take place of national or international importance, some big event take place, it obviously has an influence on the common people and on the writers itself. So the literature produced will be different. So that it has always an influence on the literature being produced. So similarly, we can see American War of Independence happening in this particular age in the later part of the century. That is, it happened in 1973 to 1976, and it was 1976 when America became a big country. And French Revolution also happened in this same century, in the same period. It happened in 1789, and these two places, these two events, these two episodes, we can say, they changed the outlook of the whole century. They changed the outlook of the period. The literature produced was different. Okay, and also Edward Gibbon. We have yet another. He was a philosopher. He was a historian. Edward Gibbon. He came up with his writing called "The Rise and Decline of Roman Empire." So the rise, the book is titled as "The Rise and the Fall of The Rise and the Decline of Roman Empire, and he published this book, this history book, actually in 8 volumes. It also kind of, was a major shift, we can say, a major thing which happened in this century, and it had a great impact, we can say, on thinking of individuals, especially on poets. Tom Paine is yet another thinker who came up with his writing called The Rights of Man. So he was a sane man. He was an influential. He wrote an influential book called The Rights of Man, because kind of, it was like this age was all about loyalty to the royalty. That's why he came up with a book called The Rights of Man, where he talks about the rights of a common man. So the age was the age of kings and princes. It was loyalty. A common man was supposed to be loyal to the royal. A common man was supposed to be loyal. A common man was supposed to be loyal. A common man was supposed to be obedient to a king or a prince. And kings and the princes were not to be, condemned. They were not to be challenged, or they were not to be questioned. Okay, and so kind of the conservatism in religion, they kind of continue to believe unquestioning. So there was no scope of questioning. There was no space for questioning. When we talk about this age, it was like loyalty to the royalty, as I earlier told you. So given all these people, for example, Edward Gibbon, Paine, who wrote The Rights of Man, Burke was yet another influential figure, we can say. They were the influential writers of this period, of the later part of the century. Okay, are you getting me?
Yes, sir.
Sir.
One second. Okay, so we have yet another influential figure who came up in this age, who lived in this age, was William Godwin. William Godwin was a philosopher of this particular age, of this the later part of 18th century. His wife, called as Mary Godwin, he is famously known as Mary Wollstonecraft, who wrote that famous book, The Vindication of Rights of Women. So it was for the first time in the history a writer talking about the rights of women. Nobody talked about it maybe before her. So in a way, she is kind of a noted and influential writer. When we talk about her, Mary, she is called as Mary Godwin, but she is famously known as Mary Wollstonecraft. Mary Wollstonecraft. Okay, and yet another, their daughter is one of the famous figures, Mary Shelley. Mary Shelley was married to P.B. Shelley later, a romantic poet. So this family, all these, the family, Godwin family, we can say, they were all the 3 people, father, mother, and their daughter. They were the influencer the writings, the literature of this particular. I already told you we are in unit number 11. Unit number 11 we are talking about MS. There is somebody called as MS. Yeah, 11. Unit 11. Please go to unit number 11. So all these people, we had three people who were a family called William Godwin, who was a philosopher, who wrote a book called Political Justice, where he talked about the functioning of politics. Okay, so William Godwin, and his wife is known as Mary Wollstonecraft. Now, Mary Wollstonecraft is known for her writing called The Vindication of Rights of Women. as I told you earlier, and her daughter and their daughter is Mary Shelley. Mary Shelley, I told you, she was married to P.B. Shelley, who was a romantic poet, as a young romantic poet. We will talk about him later. And they all these people influenced in one way or the other way to the romantic. They were an influence to the romantic writers. Okay. Now, William Godwin, he is known for writing political justice. Now, what is political justice? The book called Political Justice talks about the functioning of politics. Yeah. So, Mary Shelley, when we talk about Mary Shelley further, she is known for writing a novel called Frankenstein. Now, Frankenstein, you might have heard of the title, you might have heard of the name of the novel. It is Frankenstein. Now, Frankenstein is a novel which was published in the year called 1818. 1818, the novel was published, and the title of the novel was Frankenstein. It was a futuristic novel. It talked about the future. And in this particular novel, Mary Shelley, talked about the mechanical life of a man.
Sorry, sir. Sorry to interrupt you. Can you spell the name of the novel?
Yeah, Frankenstein. It is spelled as Frankenstein. Frankenstein. It is regarded as a futuristic novel, and her writings largely she had. She has.
Okay, it's Frankenstein. Thank you, sir.
Frankenstein. She has a couple of writings to her credit. One is Frankenstein, which is a novel which was published in 1818, which is a futuristic novel. Futuristic novel in the sense, futuristic novel talks about, or futuristic literature talks about the future events. The writer talks about the future events. The writer talks about the future events, the events which are going to take place in the future. And here, in this particular novel, she talks about the life which is mechanized, the life which is mechanical, the life which is, we can say, controlled by a machine. Okay, so she says that one day will come, a day will come that when machine will, rule one day, over man. She says that the efforts of man will not, be recognized. Machine will rule. So the age of machine. So she talks about the mechanical life. She says that machine will rule one day over man. So kind of, in a way, futuristic novel, we can say. So she says that man will become subsidiary. She says that man will become secondary. There will be no importance of a man. Machine will actually rule. And so the other novel she has to her credit is The Last Man. The Last Man, which was published in the year 1882. The novel, yet another novel is 1882, which was published in the year 1882. The title of the novel is The Last Man. Okay. Give me a second. Any questions, anything so far? You can make a comment or...
no, thank you, sir. From my side, nothing.
Okay. Mildred Smith. Okay. Anybody else can please tell me page numbers, sir? I mean, continuously talking about the page number. We are talking about the rise of the novel. Earlier, we talked about it in brief, and then we started with the romantic. I'm talking the background to the romantic poetry, to the romantic age, and that is we are talking about Unit 11. Unit 11. Please go to Unit 11 of your textbook. Block 3, Unit 11 of your textbook, Survey of British Literature. Okay. All right. Okay, so we were talking about this family called the Godwin family. First is William Godwin, who is known for his writing called Political Justice. Mary Godwin, her wife, who is famously known as Mary Wollstonecraft, and who has to have credited a famous book called A Vindication of Rights of Women, and their daughter called Mary Shelley, who is known for writing futuristic novels or futuristic fiction. Mary Shelley was the wife of P.B. Shelley, a romantic poet, a young romantic poet. Okay, so I told you about these two novels. I talked about the two novels called, written by Mary Shelley. One is Frankenstein, and the other one is Last Man. Frankenstein was published in 1818, and The Last Man was published in 1882. So Frankenstein is a futuristic novel, and of course, her other novel is also futuristic. She is known for writing futuristic novels or futuristic fiction. The Last Man, which was published in 1882, and according to this novelist, she says that one day, the day will come, humanity, man and mankind will be no more. Man and mankind will destroy itself. And she says that there will be a Holocaust kind of thing, and there will be no life on earth. That is why that novel is titled as The Last Man. He says that humans will get destroyed. Mankind or humankind will be destroyed one day, and there will be no humankind. There will be no mankind on this earth because of Holocaust. And she predicts the date also, the year also. She says it will happen in 2973. So we're already in the age. So kind of, once again, she predicts the future in this particular novel. Okay, she says that man and mankind will destroy itself. There will be no life on earth. They will get destroyed. There will be a Holocaust. Nobody will survive on this earth. So it will happen on 2973. Okay, she gives the date, a year also. And the other writer who belongs to the this age or to the later part of the 18th century is Thompson.
Sir, I just sorry to interrupt you, but I don't think we will be alive to see the day.
Yeah, we won't put our future generation. We never know that. She says that it will happen in 2973 and kind of future. The first novel earlier she talks in Frankenstein. Her prediction came true. You never know. We were not sure about that. One day in the 18th century, she says that one day a day will come where life, the human life will be guided by a machine. It will be controlled rather, and it happened later on. We never know. We are not sure about it. May or may not be. We can say it can happen. It cannot happen.
Thank you.
We're not sure about it, but she kind of gives a prediction because her writings are known as futuristic writing, futuristic novels. And we have yet another writer who belongs to this particular age called Thompson, who wrote a poem called Liberty and a Castle of Indolence. Liberty and a Castle of Indolence. So pre-romantic age or pre-romantic, we can say this age which we are talking about, it part of the 18th century, it kind of, we can say, sowed the seeds. It was like a preparation to the romantic age. It sowed the seeds of romanticism. When we talk about romantic age, the background to the romantic age, when we talk about the pre-romantic age, which we are discussing now, it was like a preparation, we can say. It sowed the seeds to romantic literature or romanticism or romantic age. And romantic age, it is like a flowering. Flowering took place when we talk about, because the lot of literature, the great literature was produced during the romantic age. William Oliver Goldsmith is also one of the poets in that, not in a group, he was one of the individual poets. He wrote the famous poem called The Deserted Village. The Deserted Village. And next to come is the most famous of all of these individuals, of these individual writers, called William Blake. Now, William Blake, you will find him everywhere, in all the English literature textbooks or English textbooks, in the syllabi of UG and PG, because he is one of the great poets of pre-romantic age. He wrote, William Blake is known for writing for we'll talk about him later. He produced two famous collections. I will talk about it after some time. But at the other poet is Thomas Gray, who is known for writing elegy. So he has to his credit elegy, an elegy which is titled as Elegy Written in the Country Churchyard. Elegy written in the country churchyard. So it was an elegy. Elegy is written on the death of somebody. William Collins is yet another poet, yet another pre-romantic poet. He is known for Persian eclogues. Persian eclogues. The spellings are Persian, Persian eclogues, Ecclogues. So his poem is titled as Persian eclogue. Yet another poet, we have yet another poet writing in this age called William Cowper. Now the spellings are Cowper, Cowpur. So he wrote a poem called The Ballad of Sir John Gilpin. It is a ballad. Ballad is a kind of, one of the types of poem, one of the types of poetry. Like you have sonnet, you have lyric. In the similar way, you have a ballad, which is like a song, or like a song. So he wrote a poem called The Ballad of Sir John Gilpin, which is a very humorous poem, which is a poem full of fun and comics, we can say. So what happens in this particular poem? His horse, the horse of John Gilpin takes a long jump sometimes. Sometimes the horse stops. Sometimes the horse doesn't jump at all. Sometimes the horse takes a long jump. So kind of it talks about, it's the funny side of Sir John Pilgrim. Yet another poet who was a Scottish poet, actually, a Scottish poet, Robert Burns. Robert Burns belonged to Scotland, a part of England at that particular time. And Robert Burns is also one of the pre-romantic, well-known romantic poets. Here comes William Blake. I was talking to you about William Blake sometime before. So William Blake is actually one of the major poets who belong to the later part of the 18th century. So he has to his credit two collections of poetry. So his one of the collections is known as Songs of Innocence. Songs of Innocence, which was published in the year 1789, and his other collection is known as Songs of Experience. So Songs of Experience, Innocence, was the first writing by William Blake, a collection of his poetry actually. It was published in 1789, and yet another publication, yet another writing collection of his poetry was titled as, which was Songs of Experience, which was published in the year 1794. Sorry, 1794. So Songs of Innocence, which was his first publication, was published in the year 1789, and his other publication was other collection of poetry was, published in 1794. He also wrote on French Revolution, which had taken place in the same 10th century, in the later part of the 17th century, 1798, and he wrote a poem on it called The French Revolution. The title is itself as French Revolution. It was published in the year 1789. Yet another poem to his credit. The poem is titled as The Song of Liberty, because once again it is revolution. It is related to it. It talks about the French Revolution, because French Revolution. When we talk about the French Revolution, the watchwords, the slogans of French Revolution was fraternity, equality, and liberty. So liberty, he we can say inspired from French Revolution, he talks about that. One of the slogans, one of the watchwords of the French Revolution called liberty.
So it was song, equality, liberty, and what else, sir?
Fraternity.
Thank you.
Yeah, fraternity, fraternity. The Song of Liberty was published in the year 1793. Okay. We have yet another writing to his credit called The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. And yet another publication or yet another writing was a poem called America, and a prophecy, which was published in 1700. A prophecy was published. It was published in 1793. And he wrote a poem on Milton also in 1804. His view of Milton was that he belongs to the devil's party. So Milton John, he was of the view that, because he thought that he kind of gives importance to Satan, and he considers Satan as the protagonist or the central figure or the main character in Paradise Lost. So he passes a comment, and he kind of wrote a poem on Milton. He says that and this poem was published in the year 1804. And his view of Milton was that he belongs to the devil's party. He belongs to the Satan's party. And so all in all, we can say that every movement, when we talk about every movement of literature, it originates, it kind of gathers pace. And, one day time comes when it kind of, stops, it ceases to exist. And, that's why we have different, different literary movements in different ages. For example, we have neoclassicism, then romanticism, then comes Victorianism later on, then comes the modern age. Literary movements, all in all, they are caused, they are strengthened, and finally they, one day they are replaced by the new ones.
So the name of the poem that he wrote about John Milton was called?
It was actually called Milton only. Milton, 1804.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yeah. So in a way, we can say that literary movements, they are caused and they are strengthened, and finally they are replaced by new ones or new writers, new literary movements. So neoclassicism, for example, I told you, for example, it was replaced by romantic movement, and this process goes on. It's like a process. It goes on. For example, there was this poet which we were talking some time before. We were talking about him, called William Blake. He said that without contraries, there is no progress. So it is a quote, it's a proverb or a saying by him. He says that without contraries, without opposites, we have no progress. So unless and until you have something, people saying, going in another direction, there is no progression. There is no scope for progress. So unless and until you don't have a contrary, you don't have anything which is opposite, which is something else, or which is different from what you are saying, progression will not happen. So contraries or these kind of opposite or oppositions, it is very much important in order to progress, in order to develop. So it was a quote by William Blake, one of the major pre-romantic poets. Okay. And yeah, William Blake also has yet another poetry is called The Little Black Boy. The Little Black Boy. The title of the poem is The Little Black Boy. Where kind of, we can say, maybe for the first time somebody talks about the downtrodden section of the society, the poor, the blacks. For the first time, it happens in British literature. A writer talking about the rights of blacks, or rights of poor people, the downtrodden section of the society. For those who are kind of discriminated on racist lines, who are discarded, who are disliked on the lines of racism. So he comes up with this interesting poem called The Little Black Boy, William Blake. That is by William Blake. And yet another poem, we have yet an important poem which is described everywhere. If you study William Blake, one of the famous poems is The Chimney Sweepers. Look at the title, The Chimney Sweepers. It once again it talks about the slave trade, and it talks about, because this was the time of slave trade, which lasted for 200 years. And he talks about, in this particular poem, he talks about how people lived, and how they lived miserably. So in a way, he talks about the lives of people. He talks about their lives. He talks about their miserable life. Okay, so that was William Blake, who has created for a poem, the famous poem called The Chimney Sweepers, where he talks about slave trade. Okay, so that was all about pre-romantic period, romantic literature, and before that we talked about the rise of novel. In the next lecture, we will talk about other romantic literature. Other romantic poets. We'll talk about next we will talk about all these people like Byron. We'll talk about Shelley, we will talk about Keats, and then later on, next we will talk about Wordsworth, Wordsworth, Coleridge, and Southey. They are known as elder romantics. We have younger romantics called Keats, Shelley, and Byron. Okay. All right. I would like to stop here. If you have any questions, anything, you can ask, or if you want to pass a comment, if you want to make a statement, or if you want to add something on your own to whatever we have studied so far, discussed so far, you can always do that. Now I am leaving the room for discussion. We have still another 5 minutes, another 5-6 minutes to go. We can utilize them.
So thank you for interesting class. Sir.
Thank you for the compliment.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. If you have any questions, any doubts, you can ask me, or if you want to say something, kind of, make it interactive, please. We can, at least you can speak for 5 minutes. You have the opportunity.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
Hello, sir.
Yes,
so while we are learning about the romantic poets and pre-romantic poets, about the poetry and the particular year, We need to mention, sir.
Yeah, it is better to mention. Better to mention. At least you should remember the dates of major points. At least it is better to mention the dates, the date of publication. That sometimes, and it is also asked in your competitive exams also. Sometimes these types of questions can be asked in fact, set or net. So in that context also it is important. And in the context of literature also it is important, because when was a particular, for example, when we talk about the date of publication, when was the date of publication is important in the sense that there is always a context. So in literature, we say that there's a text and there's a context. So a text cannot exist without a context. A context in the sense, there is always a historical context to the text. There is always a political or a social, any context is important. So context is very important. Context means when was this, when, for example, when you are talking about the publication date, so you mean to say that when this writing was produced, what was the influence, what events take place. So this is all context. So, and text is always taken into context. So context becomes important here. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, sir.
Yes, please. If you want to say something, whatever out of your understanding, you can do that. Based on your understanding or out of your understanding, whatever you have learned so far, whatever you have studied, or we can do that. We have a couple of minutes left. Please utilize them. I can see very less people taking part in the class. I mean, not more than 30 people, 29 people only. That too in the first class.
Yes, there were 60 participants.
पहले होना वो सुधरी हमदर्दी ने करना आटा रख दो डाल देती हूँ
Yes. Anything? Anything you want to ask me or add up? In this all the unit switches. I think I have talked about it in one class, in the previous class. The other day I talked about, in fact, all the units are important, but that I have given you some units to study from examination point of view. Please consult your friends. I've already done that.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay, welcome. Okay, right, all right. See you in the next session. Till then, take care. Bye.